Right, welcome everybody. We're just gonna wait for David to log on. This is live radio for. Right, hi David, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, very well, thank you.
I'm slightly nervous today, David. I have no idea what you've planned. What are you going to teach me? I'm curious because anyone who knows me knows that I love sciencey things. So let's start this off. What are you going to teach me today?
Well, I want to talk to you about this thing that you'll see in all of the revision guides for science, the formula triangle. Now, if anyone's ever, if you've got young people that are taking their GCSE exams, you will see that they'll have spread out in front of them all of these revision guides, and they will open them. What you'll notice in the chemistry, in the physics, in the biology, and even in the maths revision guides, you will see these triangles all over the place. And at a distance, you'll think that they're probably trying to enter some sort of cult because of all these little triangles and symbols and things like that. That's what I want to talk about this morning, the formula triangle.
Right, that sounds great. Off you go.
Right. Well, okay, you might remember back from your own GCSE days, and you might have fond memories, very distant memories of this thing. It's a triangle, and in it there are some symbols. And at the very top, for example, you could have like D, and then underneath it you'd have two letters like S and T. And what it is there for is to help people to remember or rearrange a formula. So, for example, distance divided by time gives you speed. And these revision guides, they give you this method, this formula triangle for doing it.
Yes,
and,
I remember.
Yeah, you might have really fond memories as well. I've spoken to people that will come across and say, the formula triangle saved my life. That this is, it certainly saved their bacon when it came to the actual exam themselves. Now, the formula triangle is something I've been doing some research on. And I've been trying to pool opinion from right across the teaching sector, from all subjects, all experiences, to figure out what is the issue. Because a few years ago, some voices in education started to say that they weren't sure that it was a good approach to solving this problem of how to teach children to rearrange equations, which they need for at least four of their subjects, and probably a few more as well. And so they started to challenge this. Now, having spoken to pretty much everybody that would speak to me on the subject, I've come up with the top two reasons why this formula triangle is a problem, and what we should look at to think about alternatives. So here's the thing. Why is it not so great? Well, what it basically does is to learn how to rearrange the formula. You use your thumb and you cover up one of those letters, and it shows you what to do with the other two. Like you could divide them or you could multiply them together. And this helps you in the exam to rearrange the equation, stick some numbers in, and you get the answers out. But the problem is that it doesn't give you any way forward if there are more than three variables. So, for example, when these equations get long and complicated, and we've all got nightmares of our days at school where it went from being simple to being really complicated, normally far too fast. Well, the issue here is that the method that we teach them here doesn't actually teach them how to do it. It's like a trick. It's like a way of replacing the understanding of how to do it with some, like, there's a shortcut, but that shortcut itself doesn't teach you what's going on. And so there's this cognitive issue, this thing that it's basically a poor foundation stone on which to build anything more. Now, some people say that if you're not planning on building anything more on it, then it's perfectly valid. And that if you are, for example, many teachers I've spoken to have said that if they've got like a set that finds the science quite difficult, inaccessible, one of the things you just need them to be able to do to unlock a load of other things is just use the formula. And so for people like that aren't going to go on any further with this thing, that's how they do it. They get the triangle, brilliant, off they go. And the revision guides, they start off, the very first page of the physics revision guide says the most important thing that you need to know to pass these exams is how to use these triangles. Now, Here is the killer argument against it. Now, this is the most extreme view that I'm representing here. So this is the people have said that they actually think that teaching pupils to use the triangle is cheating. Now, I know everyone's sharp intake of breath. How could something so controversial have come out of physics and subjects like this? Well, here is the justification for why people think it's cheating. And they think it's cheating because they see that what pupils need to be doing is they need to be able to use and apply the formula to work out the answer. But what they're doing is they're using a method that isn't actually working with the formula. It's a standing that replaces the formula. And you might think, well, hang on a minute, they've still worked out the answer. Surely all methods are valid, even if it's just an alternative method. Well, what's going on is because the pupil is not understanding what is going on within the triangle, then it's basically a way to get them to the answer without them actually going through what the question is asking them to do. And so basically like this, I've heard the comparison that it is like providing a pupil with a calculator in the non-calculator maths exam.
So
Which is
essentially, go ahead, David.
Yeah, which is a shocking accusation, because if you've basically given somebody a tool that gets them to the answer, even though they don't know what they're doing or they haven't understood the process of it, shock horror, then it's defying the point of the question. And some people have said that in subjects like maths, you don't necessarily need to know how the method works. You just need to know how to apply the method. And that is true for lots of things. I mean, you might have, if you've ever done any, I don't know what your A-level maths is like, Sobia, but if you've done a little bit of maths, you remember this thing called Sokotoa, which sounds like some volcano erupting somewhere, but actually it's a way of figuring out the angles in these triangles, which are of huge importance to people that care about such things.
So for me, I didn't do maths at A level. I started it off because at that time, in our days, we were supposed to do 3 A levels and general studies. So we weren't able to do 4 A levels, but I did start off with 4 A levels and then it got too much. So I ended up with biology, chemistry, and computing because I knew I was going to go into computer science. And so I ended up doing that combination of subjects. But I understand what you're talking about, the formula triangles, and I definitely do remember Sokotoa. And the things that are interesting, what you're saying is that when you've got a complex problem, a student isn't able to take that complex problem and solve it on their own because they're depending on the formula triangle. So essentially it's like a calculator that you're actually importing a formula in and you get the answer correct, but you've not actually understood what's going on. Is that correct?
That is bang on. That is exactly the issue that people now have with it. So with Sokotoa, for example, students use that in maths without necessarily knowing what is sine, what is cos, what is tan. And I do remember my own maths days that the teacher endeavoured to try to explain to us where sine, cos, and tan came from. There was a real attempt, but it was like pushing a giant boulder uphill. That the understanding the why behind Sokotoa is so much harder than understanding just how to use it, how to press the buttons on the calculator. So
that's interesting because the why bit really does come into it, because this is something that I've been thinking about with maths teaching as well, that sometimes the reason why students aren't grasping certain concepts is because they've never been given the why. They've always been just taught to do the method only, but there's been no reasoning behind it. I know I struggled with maths when I was learning. I was never given an understanding of why we were doing it, the background behind it, and that's really, really important for students to grasp hold of.
Yeah, some students they can't accept it unless they understand the why, and this is what I think is one of the major differences. When I spoke to maths teachers about the formula triangle, they were quite accepting of it, actually, surprisingly so, because I thought they would my average my impression of a maths teacher is that they are they're fastidious detail hunters, that they're after they really want to get that nuanced understanding. But actually what their argument was to me was that it's the application of the method that is like the focus, and not like the origin of the method or like what is going on. And so they're quite happy with within some things being what we would call procedural teaching somebody how to apply a procedure to something, and almost looking at it like a piece of machinery that just gets you from A, it goes through some weird function, and then it comes out at B. And so they were quite happy with it. But the difference was, and this is within science, is that within science we're not really that interested in the answer to things, and that's not what the exam is asking us for. It's asking us to show how we work it out. It wants to know, it wants to link, like, here is some stuff, show me how you get to the answer. And this is the key difference, that with science we kind of can't just say to somebody that you have to accept that something is true. You have to be able to, like, logically show that it is true. You have to apply the method, and you have to work the method to demonstrate that it's true. And so that is the main difference. In science, we should never do things that are procedural. We've got to
Yeah.
take people through it.
I've just had a message come in from Tom. Have you ever had a student write syntax error as an answer on exam paper or assessment?
It's not the only thing that you can write on a calculator. Believe me, there's other things that students have written, and a common one is, "Sir, I've got a different answer," and you go over, and of course they've written something really silly on the calculator. "Oh, thank you very much." Like, I walked straight into that one yet again. And another great one is, of course, when it's like a math page, find x, and then someone circled the x on the page and written, "Here it is."
Yeah, I've had Khalil just message in with a couple of digits. I understand that, Khalil, straight away what you've said. But yeah, it is hilarious the things that kids come up with. So yeah, carry on, David, what you were saying.
Right, so here we are. We've got the scientists and teachers, and it's not. And I don't want to represent it as, there is a consensus, because there is not. Different teachers are using different methods, and it's not for me or anybody else to say that anybody is wrong in what they're finding is working. But one of the things that the sort of groundswell of opinion is supporting now is that scientists, they need to teach a little bit of maths. That one of the things that is really valuable is if the scientist just stops and says, "Okay, now for the next bit, I need to remind you about algebra," because algebra is the mathematical skill of rearranging those quantities. That was the bit that's missing. The pupils have forgotten that. They've stepped out of their maths classrooms. They're in their science classrooms. They don't care about the maths anymore, because now they're thinking about science. But the science teachers actually need to say, "Okay, everybody, let's down tools. We need to talk maths for the next 10 minutes." And
that's interesting. Sorry to interrupt, because that's just the same like business studies. I've got a lot of maths in mine, and students have this inability to transfer skills from one subject to another. And it's something that I thought about years ago, that we should probably break down subject disciplines, instead of having discrete subjects, maybe have something cross-curricular to make it easier. But I mean, that's another conversation. But I agree with you. Students are unable to transfer skills from one subject to another, and essentially as teachers we should all be working together, right?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that you can do in your school is you can get it, we're quite often asked to do like CPD events that go on inside a school, and inset days and things like that. And there is with the learned societies that represent like biology and chemistry and physics, they put forward a motion to the government to say that one of the most valuable things that can occur is subject specific CPD, like how to get onto the really nuanced development within your subject. And it's not just a case of learning more about it, but almost learning more about the way in which it can be taught, or learning common approaches, or learning what maths do. How do maths do this? Let's go find, when do maths learn about logarithms? How, are they teaching it before we need to use it, or is it the other way around? And basically just getting a little gaggle of people. And if it can't be formal, just, provide the biscuits, and then send everyone an email and say, "Can we talk about this in the staff room at break time?" And some people will be like, "What, talk shop in the staff room? Surely not." But actually just get some people together from the different sciences and mathematics, get on the same page with it. Get like an approach for your school where you make decisions about what you want to do, and how you want to approach certain things, and just to make sure that the sequencing is right, that you're not trying to teach a mathematical concept before it's been taught in maths itself. There are things that you
That's a
can do
good point.
up together.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of sequencing and making sure that, as a whole school development plan, you're looking at schemes of work and how things are overlapping. That's really good. Khalil's just messaged in saying the cross-subject connections are important, especially for students that may struggle a bit more academically, just to keep the explanations consistent. And that's a very good point. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, that is a brilliant point. It's that consistency, consistency that you know. I'm not a massive fan of consistency in approach, but this is one of those times where actually, to keep that cognitive load right down, if there is one straightforward way that something can be explained, then make it more visible when it pops up in your different subjects. If it's the same approach in this subject as in chemistry, as in biology, as in maths, then that is going to be a better way.
Right, I've had a few more messages come in, David. Mel's messaged in saying her other half, who teaches maths, sent his school's science faculty a Christmas card. Inside, he'd written, "Without us, you're nothing." What do you think to that, David?
Oh, brilliant. No, I have massive admiration for the maths teachers in the schools that I've worked in, because really, truthfully, you make the jobs of the science teachers much, much easier. And this is not me sucking up or anything like that. I just say if the maths is done well, then the science just flows. And so I have not got words to how much I admire my mathematical colleagues.
And we've also had another message come in from MBD Science saying we worked with our maths department in the way David mentions, and we found that there were a few things that the kids are expected to know for science way before they need it in maths.
Yeah, that is an issue, and I really think that you don't necessarily have to be involved in maths or science education if you're involved in the curriculum delivery at your school, or you're a senior leader that has responsibilities over the delivery of the subjects. This is an easy win, and it just involves getting people together. And one of the issues that we have with how basically schools are developing in the 21st century is that people are increasingly not seeing each other and not talking and not having these conversations that you wouldn't think worth an email, but would pop up, over a biscuit and a cup of coffee. These are the conversations that are worth having, because it gets everybody on the same page, and it makes for a much more consistent education for the pupils.
This is why you need my virtual staff room, David. I can set one up for you and we can have a teaching and learning thread where we can discuss things like this. Khalil's mentioned that he's had a number of teachers come up to him a number of amount of times saying, your kids don't know how to rearrange. And he said, yes, that's because we haven't taught it yet. So that clearly is an issue in schools, and in terms of different subjects and when you're teaching. So something that schools need to be looking into, or heads of departments need to be looking into.
Yeah, and it's not Khalil's fault. Like, pupils are genuinely bad at this. You get to you get into year 13, and a pupil's been doing rearranging for the last like 5 years, and then they still get it wrong, and you're like, how can you be doing something for 5 years and still get it wrong in the exam? It's just one of those things. I think it comes down to this, that we practice English in nearly all of our subjects, but we only practice mathematics in a small number. And so it really does get less airtime. And so in terms of just like, if how good you are is going to be based on just your exposure to it, then you've had less exposure to it. So it's always going to be a second language for all but just, a small number of math mods that are like really keen and just speaking mathematics to each other. So yeah, pupils are not that great at it. And so it's our job to try and figure out how to make them better.
I'm glad you've mentioned maths today, David, because next week I've got Pete Mattock and a few other guests coming on to talk about maths. So it'd be worth you listening into that. Going back to formula triangles, do you want to just finish off what you were saying about that?
Yeah, down with the formula triangle. Let's get rid of it altogether. There we go. I've pinned my colours to the mast. I think that if we can, I think it will lead. I think this, right, that if if you teach it to sets that struggle because they've got no future in that particular subject, you're just trying to get them through the exam. That you could say that you're teaching to the exam rather than
Mm.
teaching them the skills that are going to enable them to be successful in the exam. However, by giving the formula triangle, you kind of mess up the foundation understanding of those that then do need to go forward with it. So I can see why people would use it, and I have used it myself. I'm not saying that I've never used it. I've used it off and on. But what I would say is for developing people and having a consistent and smooth flow into their A levels, those pupils that are going to go on and continue in these subjects, they need a better foundation than the formula triangle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like that in business studies, and Khalil agrees with you as well. He doesn't like formula triangles either. And he says if you know the units, you can use them to work out the necessary operation, and then it's all just about rearranging. But I do agree with you in terms of application. The students aren't able to apply things, and then therefore they haven't learned something. They've just literally gone through a sense of, yeah, exactly, Khalil. It's a quick fix to a lack of understanding. And if they forget the position of the three variables, then what happens then? Agreed, totally agreed with that.
Yeah, agreed. That I've seen some shocking things. The things I've seen, I can't even tell you.
Great, David. That's been fantastic today. It's given us an insight into a bit more of science teaching, and the issues that you have in science. Is there anything else you'd like to say today?
I think that'll do us for today. I think I've bombarded you with triangles enough, and now you're sitting there thinking, well, there we go, down the Bermuda Triangle of maths, physics, and chemistry, and all that. I think I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. David's going to be coming back onto our show regularly. He'll be teaching us different aspects of science, and he may even do some experiments. So we're going to see how that goes. Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure having you on again today.
You're very welcome.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Tom Hopkins-Burke.
This is Tom Hopkins-Burke with your weekend Teachers Talk Radio News. A Schools Week investigation has claimed that founding employees of Oak National Academy were in line to receive £41 million under their preferred proposal for the future of the online school. The proposal would have given Oak bosses 80% of shares into a private company before it was withdrawn, having been deemed unworkable. The document, Oak 3.0 Proposal, was submitted to the Reach Foundation, which runs Oak, by Oak's principal Matthew Hood OBE. In response to Schools Week's story, Hood tweeted that he insisted that every option that included employee ownership models explicitly excluded himself from them. The National Association of Head Teachers says that more school bubbles are self-isolating amid concerns over a new variant of COVID. Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of the NAHT, said that the union was picking up more reports of schools having to close multiple classes. Earlier this week, the government announced that 4,000 pupils missed school last Thursday, having tested positive for COVID-19. Furthermore, The number of students self-isolating following potential close contact with a positive case jumped from 65,000 on the 12th of May to 88,000 on the 20th of May. A petition calling for a teacher to be reinstated following his suspension for allegedly raising health and safety concerns has reached almost 1,000 signatures. Tom Mitchell, a teacher at Taverham High School in East Anglia, was suspended earlier this month following 16 years at the school. In November 2020, he was reported to have raised concerns to the school and his union about COVID health and safety measures not being followed, including ventilation and safety within bubbles. A spokesperson from the school said that the school had followed all public health guidance. That was your weekend education news with Tom Hopkinsburg.
Thanks for that, Tom. Okay, so in 2019, the NEU commissioned a report on supply teaching. There hasn't been a report since then, and that's presumably due to COVID and all the things that are happening with the pandemic. Now, in that report, the reasons cited for leaving permanent posts were workload, disillusionment of long hours, excessive paperwork, testing and target-driven cultures, which led to toxic cultures, bullying, ill health, and possible redundancies as well. Some issues that were highlighted from the report for supply teachers said that the rates of pay were falling and they were unacceptably low, and it shouldn't be happening to supply teachers. Another thing that was mentioned was that agencies were not offering pension schemes, despite it being the law for them to do so, and umbrella companies not being transparent about fees and services. For those of you who've never done supply teaching before, don't know much about it, an umbrella company is basically a payroll service, and it just means that you don't have to pay emergency tax every time you get a new contract. So the report went on to talk about umbrella companies a lot, and we'll come into that in a bit more detail later on. The supply teachers in this report said that some of the problems they had with supply teaching was that there was a lack of info about pupils that wasn't given to them. There was a lack of access to resources in schools. There was a lack of access to planned work, and most common was that no assigned manager or contact was in place to support them when they were in schools. So today, I'm going to be talking about supply teaching and how they fared during the pandemic. And supply teaching is a subject close to my heart because I was a supply teacher many years ago. And I have some supply teachers on today who are going to share their experiences, and they're going to tell us about the good and bad aspects about the world of supply teaching. They'll also be discussing how they've been affected by the pandemic. So I'm going to start off with Vicky first. Hi, Vicky. Can you hear me? Vicky? Oh, sorry. Just one moment. Hi, Vicky. Can you hear me?
Hello. Good morning, Sobia. Are we okay?
Yeah, good. Excellent. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm awake now. I wasn't when you called before.
Welcome to the show. Vicky, can you just explain to everyone what's your role and what subject do you teach?
I'm on supply. I am a drama teacher by specialism, but because of the competition and lack of jobs, I have been on supply since I qualified in 2016.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yes, it is. I always get really good feedback from interviews, but nobody's been brave enough to take me on so far.
And have they ever given you feedback? Do you know why that might be?
I always get positive feedback. I'm a strong candidate. I come across well, calm authority. The last one I had said that my skill set wasn't what they were looking for, because I've worked with a lot of SEN and disaffected and challenging young people, and the school was an outstanding school.
Okay. In terms of supply teaching, that doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not actually sure why that would be the case. But in terms of supply teaching, what have been the good experiences and not so good experiences you've encountered?
The majority of schools I go to I get a lot of information. Some schools give you access to their computer system so you can get at Sims, so you can look at all the information you require, you can access resources, and departmental staff are very supportive. There are other schools where you don't get quite as much information as you require.
And this is an issue, isn't it? Because I want to dig into a few things here. You said before that supply teachers have got good skills, and you've been given feedback that, you know, you've been a great supply teacher. I would actually support supply teachers saying that they have greater skills in some cases than those who are permanent teachers because they're wearing multiple hats all the time. Would you agree or disagree?
I would have to agree. I finished my PGDE and went straight into supply teaching, and it was a learning curve, I can tell you, because you have to literally walk into that room, you have to get all the students on side, and you have to deliver the curriculum. And it might not be your specialism. Like my first assignment was an English assignment, which I had some training on, but as a drama specialist, it's not automatic. And the behaviour management and classroom management skills that you need on supply are immense. You have
I
to
mean,
be able to keep everybody under control and deliver the curriculum, and they don't know you. They don't trust you.
yeah, I was going to say that with the supply teaching, because I've got experience of it from the past. You don't really have a time to build those relationships that you normally have as a teacher.
Not
So
at
when
all.
you are dealing with behaviour, how is that? Do you find it easy going to classrooms? Is the behaviour good, or do you struggle? What's it like?
It varies school to school. You get some schools where you go in and they accept that you're the teacher, and anything you say, they just go, "Yeah, okay, miss, I'll get on with it." You go to other schools and it's, "Who are you? Why are you here? You're not my teacher." And
Yeah.
it does make it very difficult. And I've been told several times, "You're only a supply teacher. Why do you care? Why should I do anything for you?"
And that's quite that's not surprising. This isn't anything
No,
new that you're saying to us, but I'm quite shocked that there's this perception that supply teachers aren't very good. And that's not just from students, it also comes from some staff members. And I find
it
that a bit
does.
disrespectful, isn't it?
It is disrespectful, but I have had conversations in staff rooms with other supply teachers who've maybe not doing it for the right reasons, who say, "Oh, I just talk to them for an hour," or,
Mm.
I don't bother pushing with the work because it's not worth it." And
But why
that
do you
just infuriates me.
Yeah, I mean, that infuriates me as well, because obviously being a teacher for me, standards always have to be high. But why do you think they do
Absolutely.
that? Is do you think it's Why do you think they do that?
Possibly because sometimes you get no backup.
Mhm.
If you've got a really difficult set of children, or you've got individuals who are causing a problem, sometimes you're not told what you can do with them.
Mhm.
Yes, you get the behavior management policy, and the kids generally know that better than you do. So they're like, "I should have 3 warnings before you do anything else," and it's like, "No, I've" But sometimes you're not told what you can do when you get to the end of that behavior management policy.
So in a sense, are you saying that there's a lack of support?
In some schools, yes. I mean, my experience, it is a minority. Majority of schools I go to are extremely supportive, and I know, because I've been there several times, what I need to do in certain situations. You do go to some schools where it's not made clear that there's another teacher at the other end of the corridor that will take X, Y, and Z away from your classroom.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much going on in schools in the mornings. It is very hard for people to juggle everything. And I know when I was doing supply teaching, there were some schools that I went to that were absolutely fabulous. They were organized. I got my pack right in the morning. I was able to teach. I had no problems. Cover work was set. And then there were other schools that were really, really disorganized, and they didn't know where the cover work was. They weren't sure about what was happening or who was teaching or what was going on. Sometimes you're not going to believe this, Vicky. Sometimes I turned up to a supply contract and they weren't even expecting me. They didn't know who I was.
Oh
And
no.
so yeah, so I've had quite a few experiences, and in terms of negative experiences, I mean, one of the negative experiences that I had, I was on a supply contract, and it was daily supply, I think, at that time, and that was because I'd left the profession and I was easing back into it. I was working in a computer classroom, and as you know, computers and it's quite dangerous if you have any substances or anything in there.
Yes.
And I had a kid who had a firework banger. It was a tiny little one of those little popper things. And he actually let it off in the classroom in a computer room. And
Oh,
it
no.
basically, yeah, it was very dangerous. It basically let out a really big bang. And the kids got scared. I got scared. So I left the room for a minute just to go and find another member of staff to help me. And it's amazing. This school, if it wasn't for my agency backing me up, I probably wouldn't have known what to do. But this school actually, instead of reprimanding their students, told me off for leaving the classroom for a minute to go and find another member of staff. So my agency wasn't very happy with them. my agency was my agency wasn't very happy with them, and they had to have a dressing down. And that's where I think that things can be really, really difficult for supply teachers.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes schools would rather remove the adult than deal with the issue.
And this is not to put people off supply teaching, because we've also
Oh,
had good
no.
experiences of supply
I
teaching.
love it.
Because yeah, supply teaching is a good way to readdress work-life balance. Many of the main reasons what we've discussed already why people leave, but it is because of things like workload and government policy, lack of support from SLT, lack of progression. Is it worth it? Well, when I did supply teaching, I was at a certain stage of my life, and I do think at that time it was worth it, because for me, I was able to work in a lot of schools. I was able to see the culture, which schools I liked, which schools I didn't like, the kind of students I wanted to work with. It gave me a really huge amount of options and insight into what I was looking for in a permanent position again.
Yeah,
How do you feel?
absolutely.
How do you feel about like the positive aspects of supply teaching?
I have bad days, but in the main, I absolutely love what I do. I meet so many different young people on a day-to-day basis, so many different personalities. The adults as well can be really stimulating and interesting to talk to. I've done both long-term and day-to-day. It's easier doing long-term, a lot easier, because you get to know your students, you get to know your staff, you get to know what's going on. But equally, day to day, sometimes you go in and they really appreciate a good teacher, and they'll tell you,
Mhm.
which is really nice. The students, they might have had several supply teachers for that week, and you go in and you deliver the lesson that's been left, and at the end of the lesson, one student comes up and says, "Thank you, miss."
Yeah, that is the nice aspect of it, because you don't, if you're doing daily supply, you don't get to develop those relationships. So when a student or even a member of staff says thank you at the end of the
Yes,
day, it means a lot to you,
it
because you
does.
don't have that time to invest in those relationships. Um, Vicky, with regards to recruitment agencies, what are they like regarding supply contracts?
I only work for one, so I can only talk about one agency, and they're very good for me anyway.
Do you
Um,
get regular work from them?
I'm hardly ever out of work. I think that's partly down to the fact that I'm prepared to do virtually anything. I've worked as a TA in primary and SEN schools as well.
Mm.
Because I want the experience, I want to learn, I want to be better at my job. In the hope that at some point somebody will take me on for a permanent position.
And do you prefer long-term or short-term supply?
I prefer long term because, like you say, you get to build those relationships, you get to have some continuity, you get to see the progress that your students are making, and getting to work with the same set of professionals every day who you can bounce ideas off and learn things from. I think that's, for me, long term has been the most enjoyable so far.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I did long term and I did short term. I liked both, to be honest, because with the daily supply, I'm going to be honest here, there were some schools that were only worth me staying in for a day or two. I couldn't see myself staying there for much longer. And then there were other
Mhm.
schools which I absolutely loved. So when they extended my contract, I was always like, yeah, I don't mind extending it. And I think the
Yep.
longest I ever did was 6 months, I think, in one school, and I really enjoyed it there because it did give me a chance to get back into the swing of things because I'd left the profession and it was an opportunity to come back in. So it gave me a swing of getting back into routine and stuff like that. Now, um, do you think that recruitment consultancies or agencies pay fairly for supply teachers? And I'm talking about daily rates, and I'm also talking about when you're on a long-term supply contract, the daily rate, for those of you who don't know, the daily rate for supply on a long-term contract is slightly different to the normal daily one.
I've not really got anything to compare it to because I've never had a teaching salary. I used to work in retail, and so anything I get per day seems like I've won the lottery. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. But
Well,
I
for
am
me,
noticing that it's going up over
mm,
the last sort of 6 months.
mhm,
I think there's a more of an appreciation for what we do since the pandemic.
okay. And so it's changed since the pandemic that you're being recognized for the work that you're doing.
My rates haven't really changed. Mine have gone up steadily over the years I've been working for them.
Mhm.
But like I say, I've got nothing to compare it to. I've never had a proper teaching salary.
So for me, when I was doing supply teaching, I was working for not just one recruitment agency. And this is really good advice for people who are listening. I signed up to 2 or 3 agencies so that I always had work coming in, and therefore that meant income was always coming in. What I noticed was that different recruitment agencies were offering me different salaries at different times. And also, long term, you were getting slightly higher on a daily rate than you would on a short term contract daily rate.
Mhm.
One of the important things that you need to do as a supply teacher, and these are just some advice and tips that I worked out. You need to learn how to negotiate, especially with a recruitment consultancy, because I found that unless I didn't state what I was looking for, what my minimum salary was, they would just give me a really low rate. So, based on your experience, you can negotiate your salary. Make sure you sign up to more than one agency. And then there are other things about paying conditions, which we'll go into in a bit. Um, have you had good or bad experiences with agencies? And can you explain in more detail?
Oh, as I've said, I work for one agency, and
Are you able to negotiate with them?
yes, yes. Um, if I've got to travel further than normal, or if it's a slightly different role, then yes. I did initially sign up with lots of different agencies, but it
Mhm.
became very complicated, and you know, there were some agencies that, you know, you get a call from one agency in the morning, and then another would ring, and then because you said yes to the work from the one agency, the second agency, some of them got really funny, you know, and it's like, oh, who are you working for?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's like, well, I've got to work.
Yeah.
So the agency I work for were one of the only ones who didn't have a problem or make it an issue in the morning. So when they had more work coming in and said, we'll guarantee to get you something every day,
Yeah.
as long as you're happy to do different things besides teaching, we'll get you work every day, with a view to finding you a teaching position that'll suit. And I must admit, I've stuck with them, and they've been very good. I've had long-term drama positions. I've had a long-term assignment every year to date, including this year.
And I mean, if it wasn't for supply teachers, vacancies might not be filled because schools may not be able to be fully operational, especially with recruitment and retention constantly going down. You know, supply teachers do need to be looked after, don't they?
They do. They do. We do. I do a good job, and I know a lot of my colleagues on the circuit do a good job. There is the odd one that you know, say you have the conversation in the staff room, and it's like, oh, just talk to them for an hour. They are in the minority.
Do you
in
feel
my
welcomed in the
experience.
staff room?
In most schools, yes. I mean, there's nobody in them at the minute. You're usually sat by yourself. But yes, in the main.
And even now, especially now, you know, it's really important to make sure that you have union advice regarding pay and conditions, and just generally, you know, things like whether you should be paid using an umbrella company or PAYE, which is a pay service. They're all payroll services that schools should be, the agency should be doing. For NQTs and PGC students, do you think they should be signing up to agencies or going direct to schools?
I think every teacher should experience supply teaching. I do, because it makes you very aware of what you can and can't do. It makes you, it increases your reflective aspects, classroom management, being able to walk into a room and make those connections. I think that's underrated. You know, it's being able to walk into a room and get a class on side. That's a skill, and I think everybody needs that. It'll make long-term teaching so much easier, and you're not fighting for half a term to get the kids on side.
Great. I'm going to bring Rabia into this conversation. Rabia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Sobia.
How are you, Rabia?
I'm good, although the coffee's wearing off now.
Right. Okay. So Rabia is also a supply teacher. Rabia, can you just go through your experience of supply teaching? What are you doing and where are you?
Right. So I've mostly worked in permanent roles. I've only had 2 experiences of supply, and the current one is I was offered, I was asked to come in September for a day to a school. Because they didn't extend the role in my previous place when the pandemic hit. So I started in September. I went for a day and absolutely fell in love with it. And I was asked within about 2 weeks or something. They were like, you know, this is a role. The person's left. They've not come back in September. They left in the holidays. Would you be interested in, you know, they'd seen my CV, they'd seen everything, and I went, yes, very much so. It was a full-time position, and then something strange, I don't know, kind of went a little bit quiet, didn't hear anything, and they were like, right, well, they changed their mind, not in a position to offer permanent just yet, but they can basically, I was promised a full year on supply, and
Mhm.
to their, you know, in all fairness, they have done that. So I have been the long-term, full-time supply teacher for this class. I've trained as a secondary science teacher, but I've always worked more with vulnerable students and challenging behavior. And I moved to SEN schools about 3 years ago. So, sorry. So, I mean, overall, my experience this year hasn't been too bad. I think it does come into your, the management that you have in your school. And my line manager has been very supportive, very much from day one. Like, you're the class teacher, you have autonomy, you do things. And it, the only difference has been my contract, the fact that I'm not on a permanent contract. But what's happened this week, which I know you're aware of, I was told that I needed to apply for the role and, as I call it, audition for the role that I'm already doing.
So they were actually asking you to apply for a role that you've been doing for a year beforehand.
So yeah, they've said basically I asked them around after Easter as well, what's happening moving forward, because anyone who's in education who knows, the jobs come quite quick. You want to make sure that you've got something. I wanted to be on a permanent contract. I'm keen to go further in leadership, so I was very much, it's I can appreciate Vicky's and your point of view as well about having the experiences as well. And yes, it has. I've been very lucky this year, but they've said to me, you will have to apply as everybody else. We were given interviews. I wasn't really given much information. It was just a case of, this is what you're going to do, 25-minute lesson observation. Then we'll do an interview over, Teams. And on the basis of about 45, 50 minutes from what they've seen on that day, I was told, and not by them actually, it took them a while to tell me that I didn't get the role. They said you weren't the strongest candidate on the day. There were 2 roles.
Hang on a minute. You've been working for them for a year, and then on the day you weren't the strongest candidate.
Oh yeah, it gets really interesting, Sobia. You know me. There was 2 teacher roles. There were a few teaching assistants, high-level assistants as well. There, I had a young lady who's a teacher who'd been supplying as a TA on she not full-time, just random days she'd come in and things, even though she was a teacher. And she was talking to me and said, I'd really like to apply for a role here. And we saw that there were 2 roles, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Completely encouraging her as well, because she's absolutely fantastic. And she messaged me on the Thursday when the decisions had been made, and saying, have you, did you get it? And I said, I've not heard anything. After school, it's about 4:30 by now, still not heard anything. And she goes, well, they called me at 3:15 to offer me one of the roles. So I was like, look, brilliant, because I really do believe we need to support each other. She completely deserves it. I was very happy. But I thought, I've not heard anything. Okay, fair dues. Sent an email to whoever, was dealing with it, and said, just wondering, are you going to be making that final decision today, tomorrow? And I get a call from HR just before 6 o'clock whilst they're driving in their car, you can tell, saying, hi, yeah, we just wanted to say, I was like, well, can I assume I didn't get the role? They were like, yes, sorry, there was just so much strong competition. And I was like, okay, thanks, bye.
So they didn't even contact you to let you know that you hadn't got the role?
I got the phone call the next day. So Friday was inset for us. I've always gone on inset days. I've been happy to go in, get more training, get support. You can appreciate being in education right now at this time as well. We've got so much coursework, so many things that need happening. And having kid-free time, student-free time is so important. So I was like, yeah, no, I'll come in. And I said to my line manager, I just sent a message. I said, I don't want you to think that I'm not coming in because I didn't get the role. I'm not coming in because no one's had the professional courtesy to tell me that I haven't had the role. especially when you're working in school. And I had a phone call from the principal basically saying, well, I was coming to find you because you're an internal candidate, wanted to speak to you face to face. And I just let them say whatever they wanted to. And it was such a, I'm reading from the script kind of thing. You just, you know, weren't the strongest candidate on the day. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. See you after half term, because I thought I'm not, you know, going to indulge in this conversation. The reality is, we always talk about what's our evidence, you know, show your evidence, show what, back up your results and these, that, the other. I wasn't allowed
Show
to
your
share
impact.
I wasn't allowed to share a PowerPoint because they'd asked us for a 5-minute PowerPoint presentation with people who are employed at the school. There was only 2 members on there. You know, they've seen photos of the children. We have pictures up on our doors and, you know, everywhere, XYZ. And for me, the best way to show the impact was to have, you know, it was photo evidence to show this is the start of the year, this is what they can do now. I work with, it was, even though it was a Key Stage 4 class, it's a semi-formal curriculum. And we've been focusing a lot on, some students just really can't write their names correctly. You know, there was such a wide variability from day one anyway. And my point was to show, well, the student who's never sat in a classroom with everybody else is now sitting with everybody else, is playing with everybody else. This is credit to, you know, the staffing, my colleagues, the relationships I've built with the students and that. How can you, as a special needs school, say that based on 40 minutes of what you've seen, you know a person is going to have that long-term impact, especially when, again, like Vicky has said, you know, I was told you must apply for this role. We're lucky to have you. Your experiences, XYZ, you know, all of that. And for me, it's just been a case of, you know, I've said to you, Sobia, this is like 7 years now I've been teaching. If you are getting that positive praise and everything, why is it the role's not offered? And then to say to me you're not the strongest, yet the caveat there is the other person who has got one of the roles, they have never taught in special needs before, and they said to me, I'm worried that I've not, you know, had the experience, so I most probably won't get the role. Now I'm going to throw another factor in there, because I strongly believe this, that is it to do with the fact that the higher up the pay scales you are, that they can essentially have 2 members of staff in that.
So you're saying that, for example, they would take on younger teachers who are cheaper rather than take on someone who's more experienced, who obviously costs a lot more.
That is, I am saying that, yes, based on just not from what I'm seeing, but this is based on conversations from, you know, when you've seen more experienced teachers leave the profession. I mean, we've all seen, I think the main question, if we go into our big question is, why is there so much supply in certain schools, in certain places? Why is teacher retention so low? I can completely, you know, appreciate and respect those people who want to be more flexible. You know, it might be, like you said, your work-life balance, kids at home, things like that. That's great. You know, you should be entitled to do it. We have spent the last year, I've worked from day one of this pandemic, because we've always had the, you know, the special needs kids in, or the key worker kids. So I've been every single day, very different to mainstream physical body in the classroom. And we've put ourselves at that, and we've done that because we want to support our students, their well-being, as well as their learning as well. So how can you then reward loyalty in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It does seem a bit silly, because Mel's just messaged in saying that we have a bizarre situation where experience isn't valued in our profession, and I do seem to agree with that. There is a general trend where, you know, people who are experienced are not valued. And Mel says that it does seem to be a hindrance when trying to get a job as well. And I do honestly believe it does come down to a financial aspect, because when you are looking at finance and budgets in schools, there is a big issue with budgeting right now. And it, you know, for school leaders who do have schools where the turnover is high and they are in debt, that is one way of making sure that their costs are kept low. So Rabia, what was it like working during the pandemic for you? as a supply teacher?
I think one of the things, the reason why I've said I felt very comfortable working in SEN, because I had quite a big classroom. I had 10 kids, and you'd have your 2 or 3, whoever adults were coming in the room. So and we had quite a good ventilation system. We had to keep the door shut because of a student, but we were quite okay. It wasn't too bad. So when we started off in September, October, I have to say PPE wasn't really provided to the best. It was more kind of, bring your own mask, bring your own things. I've never thought much to it, because you just think you want to protect yourself and protect others. I think it was when we got around to December time. Well, initially, I think for anybody, the first term when we started, anybody just had to cough or sneeze and you'd get so scared, because you were like, oh my gosh, is that COVID? What is it? And slowly you started getting a lot more, okay, we kind of know what to look for. Coming back in January, that first, the one day we came back and then everything closed again. That was when we were all as colleagues, and that was the first time that I felt really worried, because it was a case of there is no protection. We have everyone in the classroom. They say, you're in your bubbles, and our kids have never been able to mix with each other, which we really, really feel. But at the same time, they are mixed on the buses and the taxis that they take. They were saying that staff could all sit together in the dining area from different bubbles. So that was a bit of okay, you're just being a bit cautious, you're a bit worried. Then obviously we went into this whole lockdown. Okay, we're going to get key worker kids in. I would say 50% of mine weren't key workers, or really they didn't hit the threshold in any way. They should have been kept at home. And the next thing I know is that I have a full classroom of students. And it was kind of a bit of a running joke in the school, because I was the one known to have all the kids in. And despite that, I was being asked to submit weekly lesson planning, online lesson planning, which would be the equivalent to about 6 A4 sides. And
so on supply teaching, sorry, Rabia, to interrupt.
Yeah.
On supply teaching, you were still expected to carry out normal teaching duties to the highest standard every day.
Every teaching duty. I rarely took lunch breaks and things. I was always doing duties with everybody else, because again, it comes down to staffing. What we were told more recently, and I don't know if you'll be able to shed more light on it, or Vicky might be, but they said to us that there is a national shortage in supply. This is what we've been told, to the fact that, if we should be 3 permanent members of staff in a classroom or something, let's say hypothetically, it's been 3 supply members of staff and somebody who's a temporary or a permanent, but they are employed by the school directly. And every day it's been like, there is not enough bodies in here right now. You start to think of this, and I'm not the only one. We're talking all classrooms.
Just to come into that for a minute, Rabia, there was a campaign for supply teachers by all unions, and if you are a supply teacher, being part of a union is really, really important. The government advice for the coronavirus job retention scheme meant that employers could claim for supply teachers, but some agencies were claiming that they couldn't place supply teachers on furlough due to increased employers' costs towards the scheme. So that might have been a problem why there wasn't enough supply teachers or enough bodies in the classroom, because of the fact that they weren't able to claim for them, which is obviously, it comes back down to a finance issue, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, Sobia, I very openly said this to you. I know we've had conversations before and things. I love the job that I do. Right, I absolutely love the job. I have put 110% in, because at the end of the day, I don't look at the bureaucracy. I am very much about play the long-term game. There's other things that I will mention to you that has come out of this whole thing, but the reality for me is this is poor leadership, end of. And I'm not going to debate this with them. They are a brand new trust that have opened up, and quite frankly, it's been evident throughout the whole time that I've been there. There was no communication. There was never any SLT when anybody needs anyone. It was the feedback that came back from the first staff, they wanted feedback from us all in the first 2 months. We were like, where is everyone? Because everybody was sat home very safely, whilst the teachers are in, the teaching assistants are in, the students are in. But
hang on. all the staff were in, but the SLT weren't in. Is that what
The
you're saying?
SLT were trying the hardest to be working from home, and well, there's one SLT on site, you know, and it was a bit like, all right, okay, you know, just kind of leave us then. But it was
Okay, that is a strange one, because obviously you've just said that you're an academy, and we've just turned into an academy recently. So we've always been a maintained school, and so basically we had a different. All of our SLT were in school with us during the pandemic. So that's quite interesting that your SLT decided to work from home actually
at the start, and exactly this is what's happening. And for me, you know, lots of things like you say. I mean, wherever I've worked previously, and you know, I have worked in quite a few different places because I've chosen personally whether to stay or not to stay, because you have to look at it morally sometimes. You know, look at schools and the way things are, and if it's not if you cannot be there, if you cannot see this, I mean, in hindsight, I mean, this year, like, to really quick sum up things, like I've had supply teachers come into my classroom who I treat with so much respect, because I'm just like, doesn't matter who you are, you treat the person, whether it's the
Absolutely,
you know, the site team, the cleaners. I give them chocolates every half term because they do amazing stuff, you know, and we have to respect what they do. It's a teamwork. But I had, like I said, people coming in and saying, oh my gosh, you know, the permanent staff there, they're gossiping, they're talking about you, they're, you know, this, that, the other, questioning why you have a headscarf on, because I only started wearing a headscarf this year, so it was a very different thing. Talking about this, that, the other. So to the fact that then I went to my agency and I said, no, I'm not putting up with this, because, you know, this is unprofessional. And again, nothing really got done about it. And so after that, I was like, right, I'm resilient as heck. I'm here to do my job. I will get this permanent role, and then, you know, let's hopefully create the culture that we need.
And so it comes back down to this aspect of lack of SLT support when you're a supply teacher, that you're not treated or you're not regarded as a permanent member of staff. Therefore, they don't look after you like they should. That's the perception I'm getting from this.
Absolutely, Sobia. And the fact is, I've personally been very against supply for myself, because I had a very short stint a few years ago. And it was because I had been a long-term carer for my grandfather who was terminally ill abroad. So I'd come back and I just wanted to finish off the year on supply, kind of, you know, see what school to settle into. And the minute I raised a safeguarding issue, I was told I was no longer needed anymore. And I did this on the back of the guidance of my line manager at the time. They told me to do this. There was explicit instructions. I was then told, don't come in. And the next thing I knew, there was a fabricated case made up against me, which I openly do talk about, because it was squashed like anything. If anything, we want to call the lad or whoever, they were quite supportive. They were like, this didn't need to go like this. This didn't need to be like this. But because they put it in very conveniently just before the summer, I had like 4 months of no salary or anything. I had to wait for my name to be cleared and everything. And it was very distressing, because at the end of the day, we are told safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. And it was a very real concern. And to put it into context, it was the fact that kids were jumping the fence, going across the road to the shop, coming back, and the head didn't really seem to care.
Obviously, I don't know the other side of the story, so I've only got one side of the story right now. But I guess I can understand that sometimes things do happen in schools like this. But on the other side, there is a possibility that there is something much deeper going on that we're not aware of. And in terms of me, my experience was that I was always conscientious as a staff member when I was a permanent member of staff, and when I did supply teaching, I was also conscientious then as well. And I actually took on a job in one of the long-term supply contracts I did. So essentially I was there for a year, and then I ended up in that post, and I've been there for 4 years now. So it's kind of like, I do think that it's, you have your ups and downs, and I do believe it depends on the school that you're in as well. So
absolutely.
I'm really sorry. Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about your experiences, but that shouldn't put people off supply teaching, because I've had some fabulous experiences. And like I said, I've ended up in the school that I'm working in now as a supply contract. But Rabia, I do recommend you talk to, if you haven't already, your union. And also the other thing that I want to make clear to people at home, our listeners, that when you're working for an academy or a non-maintained school, you are employed by that employer. So their rules and procedures and regulations are slightly different. So you have to really find out from your union and look at the terms and conditions of your contract about what you need to be, how you need to be following procedures and things related to the school. Thanks for that, Rabia. I'm just going to quickly go through some other information. I'm just going to come back to this campaign that we had for supply teachers from all the unions again, and it's all about finance. And one of the issues that supply teachers did have a problem with was that supply agencies weren't able to backdate claims, which meant that supply teachers were left without any possible source of income, which actually happened to you as well, Rabia. And because of the short notice from the government, it meant that many supply teachers and agencies were unable to make arrangements to put them on furlough. Now, Vicky, you said to me that you actually were put on furlough. Is that correct?
Yes, it took a little bit of time. Schools closed on the 20th of March last year. I know this because my birthday's the day after.
Aww.
Yeah, and I panicked. I'd taken the day off the Friday. I'd finished on the Thursday, and the news came that they were shutting the schools that Friday, and I panicked. I rang the agency and said, "That's me unemployed then, is it?" He went, "Unfortunately, yes, but we'll see what we can do. We don't know what's happening with regards to furloughing or anything." And I went back into my previous job. I'm a qualified dispenser, so I went back into pharmacy for a couple of months, and was lucky that the pharmacist I'd worked with wanted me back as to help out. It was May before the furloughing was sorted,
And
but it was
because of
sorted and backdated.
Oh, so you actually did get yours backdated, which is excellent,
Yes.
because some supply agencies weren't able to. And because of that, the unions at that time, when the pandemic did hit at the beginning, they did write to the DFE about the impact on supply teaching, and the fact that their livelihoods would be affected because there was no income coming in. And this was signed by all unions, the NAS, UWT, NEU, Voice, TUC, and the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. And the situation was eventually clarified, which meant that supply teachers were eligible for furlough, which is what's happened with you. And then also that you could claim for money during the holidays as well. And the unions also made sure that they made it clear that alternative schemes which cap the profits of supply agencies and incentivize direct employment of supply teachers was necessary for schools to be doing, because supply agencies were taking advantage, right?
I can't comment on that. I'm not aware of that side of things.
What about you, Yvonne? Yvonne, welcome to the show. Can you hear me?
Oh, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Vicky. Good morning, Maureen. And good morning, David.
Hi, Yvonne. We're just talking about this aspect of the finances, because I know that you struggled to get finance when you were working as a supply teacher when the pandemic hit. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did have quite an interesting experience working as a supplier, because I literally joined a new agency, and I'd signed up with about 4 different agencies. Basically, I was getting sporadic work from my agencies, and so I signed up with a new agency, and then the pandemic hit, and how am I going to get paid? How am I going to live? And like Vicky, I got furlough eventually, but the furlough I received was 20% of full-time salary. So as you can imagine, trying to live on 20% of a full-time salary was incredibly stressful. You know, to kind of like reduce everything until you can just about pay everything was very, very hard. In terms of the agencies, as you asked me a direct question about how they finance, I don't really know the details of how agencies manage their finances. Whenever I've asked questions about daily rates, because I work as a daily supply teacher, they're normally pretty private about they don't really divulge about how much they particularly earn, and again, why should they? My situation was during the first lockdown. It was very, very much a struggle, and I imagine it did reflect a lot of supply teachers who did not have that. I think how it worked out was, if you were in a long-term booking full time, then you would have been entitled to some kind of furlough, depending on how organized your particular agency was. And the agencies I signed up with, that I've stayed with, are established long-term agencies. But they do all work very differently. And I, in the last year, I signed up with a particular agency who have been giving me regular work, and I'm very pleased about that. But prior to being with them, it was very sporadic. And I'll reiterate what Vicky said, and I think Noreen also said about having to be very, very assertive. I think, Sabaya, you said it yourself, really have to be assertive and to stand your ground when it comes to working through another person, like an agency, because obviously they have their what they need. They are a financial organization, okay, and you are working through them as a kind of commodity. It does sound a bit cold, but it is true. And therefore, in order to get your worth as a teacher, you do have to politely stand your ground. And not all agencies are the same, as I have experienced. Some are inherently supportive. Okay, some are inherently have as part of their system, will put you on CPD courses, will be in good communication, and that's really what you want from an agency. Okay, will give you a fair, reasonable, fair rate, and there are others who are the opposite to that. So it really is about finding those, I'm going to call it good agencies. Okay, it's about finding those good agencies that you can work with, that will be there to support you in your role as a supply person. Because as a supply person, we do it for a multitude of reasons. Again, it could be not being able to find that role, the ideal role. As it said, I mean, I've as you know, Sabaya, I wrote a book on teaching that's going to be published in the start of June. There's so many reasons why people do go and supply, but essentially we form a really important role, a really important key worker role in really important part of our society, and that's in the schools with developing minds. And there's so much that we need that are considered when we go into supply teaching. So the financial aspect is huge, because none of us can live on air. We do need to be paid commensurate, and it is hopeful that there is some movement in place whereby to ensure that teachers, supply teachers in particular, are going to be paid a rate commensurate with that commitment to teaching. I mean, as you were talking, I was looking at various stats to do with supply teaching, and it's quite shocking. I mean, in terms of pay, even with the top end of pay, on average, if I just give a figure, the top end of pay is about £150 a day for a supply teacher. And you hear different things. I don't know about Noreen and Vicky, to other teachers
Rabia
in
and
supply
Vicky.
roles, but they will excuse me if I pronounce your name wrong. You get such a massive disparity of pay. If you sit in a staff room as when you arrive at the start of the day, and if people do feel open enough to tell you how much their pay is, there's difference, huge difference. Some will say 220, some will say 110, all doing school. So it's really important that there does become some change, a bit like Uber, some change takes place that can unify and improve the way in which supply teachers are paid, because we are, I mean, I'm going to stick my neck out here. Yes, there are teachers who are a bit tired, weary, might come up with the odd, oh, I've just, they might not sound as committed. But I really think teachers initially go into that role vast majority out of a commitment to wanting to help others and in the education. Okay, some get jaded, okay, and that doesn't become the thing they say anymore. But I do think on the whole they do come into teaching because they love the job. I mean, I go into every school. I go into different school almost every day, and I do love my job. And there are things that schools can do to make that experience better. And that's all in my book. Okay, or there are things that obviously the agency can do to make that experience better as well. But yeah, in terms of the pay is a big thing. We need, obviously we're living in a capitalist society, we need to be paid an amount commensurate with that commitment. And when you really think about it, supply teachers are like firefighters. We step into a school when there's a kind of a crisis. They have a hole. They need someone to come in and to keep the smooth running of that school when something has gone awry. So it's really important that we get the pay, the pay to support that, because we really are an essential part of society.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, just to add to that, when you talk about in other professions, when people have to come in, like if you get a locum GP or my sister's an optom, she's a locum at optom, they are paid very well for a day rate, very
locum pharmacists as well. Yeah.
Yep.
I'd echo that. Locum pharmacists get a very high rate.
Absolutely. And with the NEU survey that you said, Sobia, I looked at it as well. It said only 9% are paid over 150 a day. And I know that they said you have to wait till 3-4 months or however many weeks it is if you're in a long-term role before they pay you more.
Can I just add that, I mean, there have been some agencies I've spoken to who have kind of like spilt the beans, and that really is a complete lie. Because I remember when I first went into teaching, and that was quite a few years ago now. The rate was it was £160 a day. Okay, that was the rate then. And for some weird reason, it's kind of it's depreciating. The pay is depreciating.
I would agree with that.
As opposed to appreciating, it's depreciating. It isn't really depreciating. It's the agencies are depreciating the pay. So it really is. There really does need to be a revolution when it comes to supply, because there is a lot. There's a lot of even though we know we work our butts off, we're having to say to the audience, I love my job. I'm a conscientious person. To kind of prove that we are there for the right reasons. But in spite of that, we need the support. There's a huge number of teachers who continuously, I'll finish in a minute. When I step into schools and I'm not probing, very often I'll hear a teacher talk about how much of a struggle it is in their role, how tough it is in their role, the permanent staff. So there's obviously something fundamentally wrong that does need addressing in terms of making the environment for teaching better, so that you can retain staff, and so that supply staff may not be as needed because of what is happening in schools.
Thank you, Yvonne. I was going to say that later on, but I fully appreciate that we're thinking on the same lines here. One last question. When the pandemic did hit, and even now, if you're forced to isolate, you're still missing out on financial assistance, because unless you meet the eligibility criteria for statutory sick pay, you're not being paid for that, are you, if you're having to self-isolate?
No. Well, I'm not sure, but I know when we had to self-isolate as a bubble, they still paid me.
Okay, that's good. That's good, because they don't have to, and that's something interesting that I found out as well. What about the rest of you? Were you paid when you had to self-isolate?
I haven't had to self-isolate at all.
That's good,
throughout
Vicky.
the entire pandemic.
That's good. Another stat that I have is that obviously Yvonne's just mentioned that there are reasons why people are going into supply teaching, and teachers are choosing to work like this because the regular post is so demanding and things like workload needs addressing. There are issues there which is making people want to leave permanent roles and go into supply teaching. So it was interesting to see that the following subjects have the most teachers leaving quicker than other subjects. So maths, science, and MFL. And I can understand maths and science because they're core subjects. So the demand and the pressure on them to get results is huge. So I can understand why many of them would try to go for supply teaching for a better work-life balance. But MFL, I was surprised that MFL was on there. Why do you think that might be?
I think
I can only comment that this week I did. I was out last week. I was asked to cover a Spanish lesson. It is, I think because I think there is an issue with behaviour. I think there is an issue with behaviour in schools, and if you can imagine trying to teach a modern where behaviour is also an issue, okay. And there's obviously a huge circuit of reasons why behaviour is an issue. But yeah,
But behaviour is an issue in all schools with all subjects. So I'm just interested why it's those certain subjects and why MFL's on there.
Yeah, but when you think about modern foreign languages, it's normally somebody coming from, not always, but somebody who's maybe born from another country, coming over here. And the culture can be quite a shock, okay? Trying to teach, to students who can present as challenging because you just don't know the culture.
Okay, what about you, Rabia?
On the other hand, I would say, I know a few MFL teachers, and what they say is that they'll be like, there is not a lot of jobs and roles because with the academies as well, because they can choose their curriculums. A lot of them are choosing not to. So things like the humanities, things like music, drama, they're not actually giving that many permanent roles.
Okay, right. Okay, just to finish off then, I was doing, for those of you who don't know, I used to be a union rep, so I really went to town on this one. In terms of unions, the unions have been campaigning for you, and it's across the board. So it's every union that has put this together, and they have campaigned for there to be a national register of supply teachers being paid in line with national rates. There should be higher pay from supply agencies for supply teachers. There should be national standards for supply agencies. There should be a supply charter that's given out for schools, so they're looking out for supply teachers. There should be more publication, and Yvonne, you'll be interested in this. There should be more publication written and more guidance on supply teachers from unions. And people have chosen to work like this. So, it is this area that needs to be looked in. And what we need to remember as professionals within this, within the education sector, is that this is just like consulting, and this is just like temporary contractors who work in industry. And I think we need to just respect them a bit more. And there needs to be more, there needs to be more investment. And I just think that there aren't enough secondary teachers in our country right now in the profession. People are leaving their posts, and we just need to make sure that the remaining teachers that are in post and are choosing to work as supply teachers are respected in the roles that they're in.
Yeah.
So
children's attitudes are reflections of the adults that are around. So we've got to sort that as well.
Yes, I totally agree.
Absolutely. There needs to be more professionalism. You need to mirror the behaviours you want seen.
So model the behaviours, So fair pay and conditions needed for supply teachers, modelling the behaviour you want seen, respecting staff who are supply teachers as professional colleagues, because essentially they're helping you out in your school today. Right, ladies.
I had one last thing, which I wanted to say. The one elephant in the room that wasn't mentioned at all was race.
Yes.
We did not talk about racism. We didn't talk about race in schools. So that's for another meeting, but thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, everybody. Right. Okay. Thank you to all my guests today who've come on, including David. It's been absolutely fun and a pleasure going through this. I'm going to be resting for a few days during half term. It's the first time I've had a break in a very, very long time. I'll see you all next week. Next up, we have Amy instead of Graham. Then we've got Khalil, and then we've got Tony this evening. It is going to be a fantastic lineup of Sunday's show. Take care. See you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.